Spain puts its separatists on trial. These politicians wanted independence. Instead, they might get 25 years in jail. I'm Adnan Nawaz, and today's newsmakers are the Catalan leaders in court. Identity can be a complicated issue. It can present difficult personal and social challenges. In Spain, it's also a critical political problem. 12 Catalan separatist leaders are on trial there, charged for their role in the region's bid for independence in 2017. Notably absent is Carles Puigdemont, the former Catalan president. The face of the independence movement fled the country and is still in self-imposed exile. Those left behind could spend the foreseeable future behind bars. Randolph Nogel reports on what the trial means for Catalonia, Spain, its people and its government.
It's arguably the most significant trial in Spain's 4 decades of democracy. 12 Catalan separatist leaders have had their first day in court. They all denied the charges against them, including rebellion, sedition, and misuse of public funds. If convicted, some could be sentenced to up to 25 years in prison.
There is no international or EU law that prevents the succession of a sub-state entity. It does not exist. You will not find that anywhere. We can defend self-determination. It is a synonym of peace, not of war.
Catalonia's referendum and subsequent declaration of independence in 2017 were ruled illegal by Spain's constitutional court. Those now being tried for their role are seen as political prisoners by their supporters and traitors by many Spanish nationalists. While some of Catalonia's former leaders were arrested, others fled, including former Catalan president Carles Puigdemont. He called the trial a stress test for Spain's judicial system and democracy.
Today we have seen honorable and innocent people, Democrats, people who have acted under a parliamentary mandate, sitting in the docks as if they were criminals.
The trial begins as Spain's socialist-led government is struggling to hang on to power, and that could be determined by the separatist parties rallying against the prosecution of their leaders. Both ends of Spain's fragmented political spectrum have squeezed Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez into an uncomfortable position.
For a long time, the secessionists have been defying Spanish unity, the constitutional order, and court decisions. Today, all of us Spaniards feel the obligation to protect our courts.
Right-wing parties have called recent protests against attempts by Sánchez to create a dialogue with Catalan pro-independence parties. Tens of thousands demonstrated in Madrid. He's only been in power for about 8 months, but Sánchez may be forced to call early elections if he cannot get a budget passed. And that may be difficult. He'll need votes from pro-separatist parties to do so, and they've signaled they'll need more than currently is being offered. Sánchez lashed out at right-wing and Catalan parties alike in a tweet, saying, they both want the same, a divided Catalonia and a divided Spain. The trial is widely seen as deepening that divide.
Witnessing our ministers, the President of the Parliament, and social leaders seated before a criminal court is, in itself, an attack on democracy and human rights and a shameless embarrassment for 21st century Europe. We are facing an act of revenge against a people who decided to decide.
The trial may take up to 3 months to play out in court, but the outcome could shape the course of Catalonia's secession movement and Spain's national politics for years to come. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
So let's bring in our panel. Carlos Silva is in Barcelona. He's an executive member of Spain's Union, Progress and Democracy Party. It opposes Catalan independence. Andrew Dowling joins us from Cardiff. He's the author of the book, The Rise of Catalan Independence, Spain's Territorial Crisis. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Andrew, I'd like to start with you because I just want you to put into context exactly what's happening at that trial at the Supreme Court, given what we heard before we came on air, that Pedro Sanchez's minority government has not had its budget passed, among the parties voting against his proposal, Catalan secessionists. So I think it's almost impossible, is it not, to look at that trial that's going on of these 12 Catalan separatist leaders without considering what's going on in the national government. Just give us a bit of background about that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Pedro Sanchez was able to take power in May last year, and he was able to overthrow the ruling Conservative Party with the support of the Catalan independence parties, who were very unhappy at the way Spain's Conservatives had reacted to the Catalan question over the past few years. But obviously the timing of the budget today, and, you know, it's the second day of this incredible trial, has meant that the pro-independence Catalan parties, for them, it's impossible to show support for the current Spanish government in this context.
Carlos, is it possible that these Catalan parties that, I mean, most people do think that they are part of the major reason that a minority government has been able to survive this long with Pedro Sanchez as the Prime Minister, but is it possible that those secessionist Catalan parties are using their influence over Pedro Sanchez to get their own way in Catalonia? Many people in Spain, I believe about 45,000 people came out onto the streets of Madrid over the weekend because those people think that Pedro Sanchez is in some way not carrying out his responsibilities towards, in terms of the central government in Spain, the responsibilities they believe it has towards keeping Catalonia part of Spain.
Well, Pedro Sanchez has a very weak government, and he became a president with the support of the pro-independence nationalist parties. So he's always been submitted to the demands of these parties. So in that sense, he's been a hostage of those demands, which have always been cleared. They wanted the recognition of their right to self-determination. They wanted a legal binding referendum. And they wanted a general pardon for the Catalan leaders who are being judged at the moment. So he's been a hostage of those demands for all this time, and he's also been hostage in a sense of his own personal ambition. He wanted to keep the ball rolling as long as he could, and accepting whatever the demands of these parties were. So in that sense, a big part of Spanish public opinion has felt that he was trading and dealing with things that he's not allowed to trade in a negotiation with the nationalists, which were things like the sovereignty of the Spanish kingdom or the union of the country, and that's also had an effect on the end of his term of office.
So Carlos, Sanchez is going to hold a cabinet meeting on Friday. It seems as if there's more and more support for an early election. If that were to happen, where would Catalonian independence figure in the campaign in terms of how important is it an issue nationally? How much would political leaders on the campaign trail be forced to talk about it?
Well, at the moment, the Catalonian bid for independence is the most hot political issue in Spain. And I think that was evident in the last election in Andalusia as well, when the far-right party Vox achieved a relevant position in the results due to that, in my opinion, due to this question. So if in the context of the trial and the weakness of Sanchez government, I think that the next elections, the snap elections that he's about to call, will be heavily influenced by this topic.
Andrew, you were nodding your head.
Yeah, I think the election will very much bring the Catalan question to the forefront, and it provides an opportunity for Pedro Sanchez because he's able to occupy the centre, because the two current Spanish kind of conservative or rightist parties are very much moving to the right to try to prevent votes going to the far right, which is this new party Vox. So Pedro Sanchez, he might be able to cover his left flank and he might be able to occupy the centre. And we should remember that the Socialists are still the single most important party in terms of current polling. But I think it'll be a very fraught campaign, and I think that the Catalan issue will be very much centre stage.
Okay, well, let's look specifically at the trial that's going on of these 12 separatist leaders. If they were to be convicted, in fact, you know what, even before we talk about a possible conviction, Andrew, is there any reason to doubt the independence of the judiciary in Spain? The president of the Supreme Court, it seemed kind of surprising that he would even make such a statement, talking about how important the trial is for democracy in Spain.
Yeah. Well, I think, there are a number of things. I think Spain is a parliamentary democracy and it's internationally recognised as a parliamentary democracy. There was a recent survey by The Economist, and Spain's in the top 20 in the world of fully representative democracies. However, there's also plenty of evidence that the Spanish judiciary is highly politicised, and a bit like what happens in the United States of America, there's been a tendency in the past 10, 12, 15 years, particularly of conservatives, to appoint judges who share their political values, and that's been a change from the previous period of democracy. So you do have a very conservative judiciary, and I think it is noticeable, I think, that the integrity or the credibility of the Spanish judiciary is on trial. I think it's not just the Catalan independence movement, it is the major institutions of the Spanish state, including the judiciary, that are also going to be on trial over the next 3 to 4 months. So I think it's very important for them that they're trying to show the very best face of the Spanish judiciary.
Carlos, I think it was Oriol Junqueras, the most senior of those Catalan leaders on trial. The lawyer of Junqueras said it's essentially vaudeville. He said what's going on in the Supreme Court is theatre. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that the guarantees that all the political leaders who have been judged have all the guarantee of all the rights they're protected. It's a qualified judiciary system, and the thing is that they're trying to put the focus on the Supreme Court and on the quality of Spanish democracy that, as Andrew said, has been recognized and is recognized by all or according to all the standards or the most advanced democracies. So the thing is that what is being judged here are the facts that happened a couple of years ago, and all the crimes that these political leaders committed. And so that their defense is being focused on the quality of the system. But I'm sure that they have the rights are guaranteed, and that this is not what is being judged in this trial.
Is there do you get any impression, are there any opinion polls about what the people generally across Spain would like to see happen to them? Of course, it doesn't make any difference to the eventual outcome, but in terms of what the people would prefer to see, because I certainly know that there's a strong feeling that a certain percentage in Spain would like to see these people punished for what they believe is a drive to break Spain up, which of course would be the case if Catalonia were to become independent.
The revenge is bad advice, but we all trust justice because, as I said before, we're convinced and we know that this is a qualified and judiciary system that offers all the guarantees to the people who are being judged. So I think that Spanish opinion will be ready to accept whatever the result of this trial is. But I also think that the events were serious enough, and that many people would also feel a relief if they get the sentence they deserve.
Yeah. So Andrew, accepting the result is absolutely fair enough. But if you saw the scenes outside the courtroom on Tuesday, people were very angry. Both sides were very vociferous in the support or being against the people who were walking in there.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, the Spanish judiciary is on trial, as is Catalan independence. And in my view, the approach of the Spanish judiciary to this whole issue is essentially using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, because there wasn't a real threat of independence. There's been zero violence. So the charges of sedition and rebellion are just incredible. That people have commented that they just sound like medieval charges with prison terms of over 25 to 30 years. I think you can certainly demonstrate there's been disobedience, you can certainly demonstrate there's been use of public funds, but the notions of sedition or rebellion, comparing it to a military coup, that happened in Spain on the 23rd of February 1981, where there were literally tanks in the streets in certain parts of Spain, particularly Valencia, is just ludicrous, because the Catalan independence movement has been an overwhelmingly peaceful movement. They've been able to get over 1 million people on the streets every September. So this is the problem. The charges against the pro-independence leaders are so exaggerated that it really does damage the credibility of the Spanish judicial system.
Yeah, Carlos, you surely must agree with that, right? Even if you're against Catalan independence, surely that charge of rebellion is supposed to carry with it a link which proves that people who are found guilty of rebellion would be found guilty of inciting violence. And there was never any evidence. I tell you, we on TRT World, we covered everything so closely. We had reporters on the ground. We were right across everything. Never once did we play a single clip of any Catalan leader saying, go out there and make trouble.
No, that's not exactly true. I don't agree with Andrew at all. What happened was very serious, and that was an implicit call for violence, or the consequence of what they were setting in motion was violence.
That's just not true.
Oh, that's true, because they were breaking all legal procedures. They were breaking the constitutional order. They were calling people to go to the street.
What do you mean? That's not violence.
Well, that's not violence, because
that's like saying
no, because the state and the police function.
It's like saying if I drive at 45 miles an hour in a 30-mile zone, I'm violent. Breaking the law is not violence. You have to demonstrate violence.
We're talking about the political, the call for violence that political leaders made.
The only violence was the Spanish police on the 1st of October.
Sorry? No, because there were other, apart from ANC and Omnium, which did the dirty job of instigating people to go to the street and surrounding buildings and avoiding the justice to act in Catalonia.
So are you saying that are people not allowed to demonstrate in the streets anymore? Are you saying that if you demonstrate in the street, that's an act of violence? Is that what you're saying? Because that's all it is. I mean, we've had demonstrations in the UK. Are you saying that when 2 million people demonstrated against the Iraq War in March 2003, that was violent?
Yeah. Thousands of people surrounded the building where police were seeking
violence. You can't demonstrate.
They weren't able to leave the building for 18 hours. Police vehicles were destroyed, and the people who are being judged were standing upon scars. What is violence?
Okay. I'll tell you. Obviously, you're not going to agree. Okay, there was. Okay, look, there was trouble on the streets. Okay, go on, Andrew. Go on.
Yeah, no, I'm critical of Catalan independence, and I'm happy to make a critique of Catalan independence. But I do reiterate that most reasonable observers consider the charges against the Catalan independence leaders heavily exaggerated, of sedition and rebellion. Those charges are just unsustainable, and if they're found guilty of those, that will do permanent damage to relations between many Catalans and the rest of Spain. Things are already very bad, but if they're convicted on those charges, I think that there will be a continued push for independence for the foreseeable future.
And that was exactly the point I was coming to when actually we got distracted just starting this mini part of the debate about the independence of the judiciary. So let's come back to the initial point I wanted to make. Carlos, if these 12, if any of them are found guilty and go to jail, okay, many pro-independence, pro-separatists, they say that they're already political prisoners because of the amount of time that the majority of them have spent behind bars. Some have been on bail. But if any of them are convicted, surely that is only going to create more anger in Catalonia, and the problem is going to become more difficult to resolve. And again, clearly, no one's going to influence the outcome of the trial, but if it does happen that they're found guilty and sentenced to jail, imagine if Oriol Junqueras gets a 25-year jail sentence. There could be riots around Catalonia.
Well, I'm sure that the pro-independence people in Catalonia won't be happy about that prospect. But pro-independence people in Catalonia are not all Catalans. I'm a Catalan, and I belong to that more than 50% of the population who's never voted and never been or voted for nationalist parties. So one of the effects of all that's happening in Catalonia, because of the people that were being judged now in Madrid, is that the Catalan society has been broken in two. It's been split into groups of people. So when we talk about Catalonia and feelings of Catalan people, it's a very delicate issue, because you're not talking about all Catalans. So I suppose that there will be riots, which is, depending on what the riots end up, how they end can be violent or not. That's what we were talking about before. But that's not we're in the frame of the rule of law, so we respect the separation of powers, and so we respect the decisions of the courts, and then I think that the justice must be done.
Okay, let's spend the last few minutes looking at a possible resolution to this, okay? Because we're agreed that even in the upcoming election, which we expect to be called, and even if it isn't called, we can look ahead over the next 5-10 years. Everyone accepts that this issue is not going to go away. It's going to remain very much alive. So where do we find some sort of resolution, whether that's independence or whether it's giving Catalonia increasing autonomy and still finding a way for it to be part of the whole of the national system? Andrew, where is a resolution possible? Are there actually leaders at the moment, national leaders, political leaders, who have come up with some ideas over the past however many months this crisis has been going on?
Well, yeah, the only real, if you want, visionary ideas have come from the forces of the left in Spain, which is Podemos, who are supporting the current Spanish government of Pedro Sánchez. We now have three parties of the Spanish right that want a hard line against Catalan independence, and I think history teaches us that the hard line only produces more alienation. So if the Spanish right, in their three different parties, somehow win the next election in the next few weeks or months, the situation can only deteriorate. And we should remind ourselves that when the Popular Party came into power in November 2011, support for independence was about 20%. When Mariano Rajoy's Conservative government left office in May 2017, support for independence was 45–48%. So that right-wing narrative of Spanish unity, of no concessions, no surrender to independence, just duplicated the support for independence. So the only hope for the future of Spain is a serious federal system that demonstrates and recognises and respects the diversity of Spain. Spain is a multinational society. It's got different languages, cultures and identities, and that needs to be strongly embedded and strongly supported and mutually recognised. Catalan independence also has to make concessions, because until it obtains a serious, clear majority of support, it doesn't have enough support to break with Spain. But that's the only hope. And essentially, this next general election in Spain will determine if the situation is going to get worse over the next 3 to 4 years once that new parliament is established.
As a Spanish politician, Carlos, where are the answers here?
Well, what Andrew says is not exactly true. He's accepting the point of view of the nationalists. Spain is one of the most decentralized countries all over the world. All diversity is recognized, and Catalan is compulsory in the educational system. It's compulsory in Catalonia. So the Catalonian identity couldn't be recognized more. In fact, so despite the fact that Spain is not called a federal state, it is a federal state already. So what you could offer the nationalists to make them feel happier would be a confederal relationship or status, right? Which is absolutely against the unity of nations. So there is nothing else to offer. There is nothing more to offer. The mistake is to accept the present situation as a natural situation. We're talking about the Catalan society as being pro-independence as something that's happened spontaneously. And that's not true. This is the result of 40 years of nationalist government.
Okay, Carlos, Andrew, thank you very much indeed for your time. A very enlightening conversation. Thanks for taking part in it. Coming up on the program, the United Nations says the past 4 years have been the hottest on record. We ask what can be done to tackle climate change. And Indonesia's government wants to keep its music free from foreign influence. We speak to one artist about why people are calling the proposed law an attack on freedom. What do you think poses the biggest threat to humanity? War, terrorism, nuclear weapons? In the longer term, it's almost certainly climate change. The United Nations has revealed that the past 4 years have been the hottest on record, and the 20 warmest years in history have all happened in the past 22. Climate change is real. It's escalating fast. So do we have enough time to save ourselves? Sandra Gatman reports.
Hot sun burning on my backbone. Hot sun burning in the sky.
It's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. The last 4 years have been the warmest on record. In 2018, the world's average surface temperature was the 4th hottest ever, about 1 degree Celsius above the pre-industrial average.
For the last almost 20 years, from 1990, we have observed 41% increase of warming effect.
Australia's fire seasons are getting longer and more severe. In Pakistan, water reserves are drying out. Even populations of birds, insects, and fish are dying out every year. As for us humans, more and more studies point to the potential for weather patterns to cause massive disasters, especially in the developing world. Diseases could become tougher to manage. Flooding, drought, and extreme heat could force millions to leave their lands in search of safety. If the Earth's 4.7 billion years were squeezed into one 24-hour day, dinosaurs only came into existence around 11 p.m. Mammals appeared in the last 20 minutes, and our ancestors at 11:59. The Industrial Revolution only happened in the last 5,000th of the last second. Yet despite our incredibly short time on Earth, the vast majority of scientists agree that humans have almost irrevocably damaged the planet. So the pressure is on for the world to embark on a new revolution, to change the way we power our economies and stop climate change.
We have this 30 years window now to stop using fossil energy, and if we do so, then we could stay at the 1.5 degree limit. But it's a major challenge.
Some countries are doing their part. Mexico and China have built massive solar panel farms. Norway has banned cars from its capital. But a recent report by Climate Action Tracker found that only Gambia and Morocco are on course to meet climate targets, while countries like Russia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the US are way behind.
You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake.
But that will require a level of political ambition we haven't seen yet. Without it, global devastation appears a certainty, and we're already getting a taste. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from Budapest is Diana Orga-Vorsatz. She's Vice Chairman of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. In Oxford, England, for us is Carsten Haustein, a researcher at Oxford University School of Geography and the Environment. To both of you, thank you for joining us on The Newsmakers. Diana, how is it possible that we still haven't managed to persuade most of the world how serious this problem is?
Well, I think we have. Just mentioning the fact that there have never in world history been 140 heads of states under one roof, except in Paris when they agreed on the Paris Agreement on climate change. But the problem is that we haven't realized that the actions we need to take are much more aggressive than what we have agreed to just a few years ago.
So how have we not managed to persuade people that we need to be more aggressive? Look, everybody knows now, I think it's pretty much accepted, is it not, that within 12 years, Carsten's going to speak to us more about this, in about 12 years' time, what we call extreme weather is going to become normal weather.
The issue is that so far we have been thinking about incremental changes to energy and our economies. Right now we see that we need a fundamental change in how we go about our energy system, how we go about solving our economic challenges. So that's much more drastic and much more fundamental than we used to think about. And this is much more difficult to accept. And also there is a generational gap. Often the decision makers are those whose lives won't be that much affected, whereas the young generation is only just starting to wake up that they really have to influence today's leadership, that they need to take much more bold action.
Okay, Carsten, tell us about extreme weather and how it relates to climate change. Over the past 12 months, just the past 12 months, we have reported, every news organization in the world reporting on drastic things happening in all corners of the globe.
Yeah, so the difficulty for us is to really point out and find the evidence for all the events that we see in every given year. And we can just look back at what happened in 2018 with hurricanes and flooding. And is it partly caused by humans? So the question we try to address is, has it become a more likely scenario for such events to occur? So to actually get this message across to the people is not that simple. So what we try instead to really put a number to each and any of those events, and turns out for heat waves it's fairly easy to say yes, it is much more likely now than it used to be 100 years ago. For floods, we cannot always say with any degree of certainty that this is the case. And with droughts and fires, it's sometimes even worse. Yet, I think what people need to realize, even if they are not impacted, and even if we can't always establish the evidence, that other people are definitely impacted. And especially if it comes to heat waves, we have to understand that there are regions on this planet where a tiny increase in temperature is already a very risky situation for the people there. And just because we enjoy a nice summer in the UK doesn't mean that other people wouldn't suffer a great deal. And I guess this message needs to be put out there more often.
Carsten, you're speaking to us from Oxford. You work at Oxford University. I'm going to give you an exam question. Have you ever heard of pirocumulonimbus clouds?
Yes, of course.
This is incredible, right? So when I present this program, I have to research the topics because I'm speaking to experts like you. So let's inform the viewer of the little bit of research I did on this. Pirocumulus nimbus clouds are a little-known phenomenon. They come with intense wildfires, which people believe are more and more intense as climate change affects the world. These clouds are so dense and so dramatic that their lightning can create even further forest fires. Surely something like this, to a layman like me, I look at something like this and think, well, if this is a new phenomenon, it must be related to climate change. Is it?
Well, this is, I guess, exactly a problem that we face on a daily basis. While these observations certainly exist, so people do have the impression that they see things, they experience things they haven't seen before, as you just pointed out. It's hard to, do solid science based on these, as we call it, sketchy pieces of evidence. So what we want to do instead is to really look at the science, make sure that these personal impressions are actually based on objective data. So do we really see those clouds more often? And this is then when we can actually say something about the risk and the increased risk to that point and the increased risk we are going to be faced with in the future. And I think this is where such observations can be a harbinger for what's to come, but not always.
Yes, and that's where we need experts like you to tell people like me what's going on. Deanna, you would have been in Incheon in South Korea not that long ago, a few months ago, the IPCC. It said that at the moment, we're not heading to hit the targets we need to in terms of limiting the temperature increases around the world, and that actually, if we go the way we're going now, we're pretty much heading for disaster. How much more clear can the IPCC make this issue to people, and at what stage are we going to see the actions that the IPCC would like to see?
Well, the IPCC itself does not recommend any actions. What we are trying to do, we are a scientific body, and what we are trying to do, we are just putting out the science and synthesizing the kind of data and information that we have just heard, and translating it to governments what this means, what kind of actions can they take, and what will be the consequences of their different actions. So at the end of the day, we are leaving the decisions with governments, with the key decision makers. Nevertheless, your question is still very valid, because the IPCC is quite clear about the fact that unless we seriously change the courses of action, we are going to see much more of the problems that we have been talking about and that the viewer has seen in the last couple of weeks. We have seen 100 degrees centigrade differences in the planet in terms of extreme temperatures in north and south and so on. What I worry about is a little bit about the previous discussion, that by the time we have all the data and all the evidence that my colleague has discussed, then it might be too late. So as you mentioned, we really need to be bold and take action now.
Okay, so you know what? You may be restricted, Diana, from your position at the IPCC in saying what people really want to hear, because it seems as if there may need to be a more forceful effort by governments to make people act in a way that will help save our planet. Because obviously it's an individual choice, but individuals, we have a love of our lifestyle. We don't want to give it up. Right? So maybe we need to be told. And there's another issue here. Let's just show a tweet from Donald Trump. There was a recent massively cold spell around the Midwest of the United States, and Donald Trump, probably a climate change denier. He wouldn't say it, but the way he talks about clean coal, as if that even exists, people accuse him of being a climate change denier, and he says in the beautiful Midwest, wind chill temperatures are reaching minus 60 degrees, the coldest ever. Where is global warming gone? Bring global warming back. And then there was a clip on his favorite TV channel on Fox News where they're politicizing climate change. So here's this very short clip of how some, and they seem to be on the right wing, regard climate change as a left-wing issue. Let's play that clip.
We know it's cold outside. Now the left is actually using new terms for global warming, like extreme weather. Why do they keep changing the language? Are they just pushing the same old agenda with new words?
Okay, Diana, I can't put that question to you because of your position at the IPCC. I respect that. Carsten, what do you say to people who claim that climate change is a left-wing conspiracy? How do you fight against that?
Well, yeah, this is a good question. Actually, for us, it's kind of funny with like what new crazy ideas they, like crackpot ideas that we call it, come up with. And so I have been debating people, or start debating people probably 10 years ago, and I thought, you know, some of them perhaps are rational enough to realize, okay, they just ventured down the wrong path. Turns out that, yeah, like social sciences can tell us quite a bit about how people actually behave. So it's literally like inbuilt in us. Not only that we are really bad at reacting to dangers that are far ahead in the future, but also how we then deal with that kind of information. And some people who just, yeah, have to question their whole life and certainly their lifestyles, they react with complete denial. And I guess this is what we have to realize. So discussions don't really work. It's ideologically driven, and we have to address that point, because as much as we are sometimes not quite sure about whether a certain extreme event has become more likely or not, that's not the big point. The science is clear. We know it's us, we know it's bad, we know it needs to be tackled. And so that message is clearly out, and now it's on us to really like debate with the people who are interested to solve the matter. The IPCC is there to provide all the sort of framework that we work in, but we as like scientists and citizens need to speak out and certainly anyone else needs to engage. And we have to stop like balancing somehow crackpot ideas with the science. So we clearly have to point out what Trump's saying is rubbish, Fox News is rubbish, and this is nothing we even need to discuss anymore. Let's focus on the positives, let's focus on the future.
Of course, Diana.
Yes, I actually argue that it is becoming much less and less politicized. Perhaps, yes, there are still some extremes. On the other hand, what we see also in the United States is that the vast majority of the economy is going down the path of actually reducing its emissions. Most of the years, actually, even the US emissions have been going down, except for last year when it started going up again. Also last year and the year before, the vast majority of energy-related investments were in renewable energy and not into coal, not into oil, not into natural gas. So what we see is that the industry, whether it's left or right or middle or whatever, it is going down this route. And this is what is important to see. And this, even the IPCC acknowledged, even in its report that you just referred to, it used even the word, this has dramatically improved. The conditions for renewable energy and other mitigation technology have dramatically improved, and this transformation has started.
Okay, you had talked about the economy when we started this discussion,
I
Diana.
absolutely agree.
Okay, listen, this point I think is important because who are going to be the great saviors of the planet? And Diana had talked about the economic impact of climate change and how countries are struggling to compromise their economies when they work towards mitigating climate change. You'll know the sovereign wealth funds that control $3 trillion worth of assets. There were a COP24 in Poland. They demanded that governments take some action against climate change. For the past few weeks, possibly a couple of months, on Friday, students around the world have been coming out of their classrooms and marching in their hometowns to demonstrate, to force action to be taken against climate change. And yet, at the moment, still not enough is being done. So we come back to the original point every time there's ever a discussion about climate change is what's going to force people to take action. Diana, can you give us some examples around the world of projects that you think are good sort of touchstones to emulate?
Absolutely. For example, we are just working on an Energy Plus district in Vienna, which produces actually more energy than it uses in a whole district. This is not totally science fiction anymore. We already have many buildings around the world which actually produce more energy than they consume. In fact, as many of the viewers can think this is the luxury of the rich, but in fact, even in Hungary, there are companies who are producing and selling buildings, net Energy Plus buildings for average Hungarian families in the countryside, really not the rich market. The same way we have mentioned how more and more energy is being produced by renewable forms of energy, even for the poor in Africa, India, and so on, providing actually energy access, so allowing them to be able to switch on the light and turn on their mobile phones to get access to information and so on. So this is really spreading. What we need more is also we need to rethink agriculture, since emissions are also very important from this sector, and we haven't reached a lot of change in that. Also, what is really worrying is the enormous increase in flying from around the world. Just the amount of airports, for example, China will build in the next couple of years, will probably compensate all their other efforts of really being able to crack on coal-related power emissions. So,
okay. We're out of time. This issue, this discussion will go on for years and years. Thank you very much to both of you. Really appreciate your coming on to the Newsmakers.
Thank you.
That's one of the favorite bands of the Indonesian President Joko Widodo. But the people of Indonesia may not be able to listen to it for much longer. The government is considering a draft bill aimed at banning what it calls negative foreign influence on its music industry. Many musicians are not impressed. Hundreds have taken to the streets and social media to protest the proposed law. They say it's a direct attack on their freedom of expression. If the legislation passes, anyone producing musical content considered blasphemous or pornographic could go to jail. So is Indonesia justified in trying to pass such a law? Let's go to Canberra and speak to Hikmawan Saifullah. He was a guitarist with the indie band Alone at Last. He's now a lecturer at Murdoch University's Asia Research Centre. Hikmawan, welcome to the Newsmakers. Who is the government consulted in putting together this draft legislation?
So this draft bill on music is actually produced by the Commission 10th in the House of Representatives of the Republic of Indonesia. And it has been said that it is actually the product of this musicians organization. It's called it's actually an organization of an elitist pop musicians. They are really close with the powerful elites in the government. And this draft is actually excluded the participations, the insights and opinions of other hundreds of thousands of musicians outside the circle. So this is the problematic of the draft bill, that it has never been consulted with the general musicians.
So, but when you consider the population as a whole, those who listen to music rather than make the music, is this possibly a reflection of a conservative country, or is it, as you seem to be suggesting, a minority thinking they know best what is best for the majority?
It can be both of them, because as you probably already know that Indonesia is turning very conservative in the last several years. And actually, as you said before, that actually some elements within the draft bill that contain some strictly religious and conservative points, such as the rejections of the negative influences of foreign music elements. And then there's also that all music performances, productions, or expressions have to be in accordance with the religious values and national culture. And this reminded me of the past authoritarian years in Indonesian modern history in regards of musical expressions.
Yeah, that's right. There was the example in 2011 in Aceh province where some punks were arrested and then taken for re-education. And re-education can mean something very dark in some countries. But, okay, just to look at it in the cultural context of Indonesia, is the modern world, does the government see the modern world as impinging upon traditional Indonesian values? Is this an example of possibly that sort of belief?
It can be said like that. It's a very, I can say that this is an endless debate about how our cultural expressions have to be in accordance with our national identity. And this problem have already been existed since, for instance, in the 1960s, when Indonesia was still led by President Sukarno. And this is like the early years of post-colonial era where Indonesian government was paranoid of the foreign influences. During the Sukarno era, the expressions of Western musical productions have to be banned by the government because of the reasoning that it's actually considered as a part of Western cultural imperialism. And it is also continued during the Suharto era where many underground rock performances were repressed, like the concert of Metallica in 1993 in Jakarta. It was very chaotic, and thousands of metalheads and punk rockers were pretty much repressed and beaten up by the military personnel in order to pretty much secure the performance.
Hikmawan, Joko Widodo himself, whether he is now, he used to be a bit of a metalhead. You are talking to us from Australia. How is it possible that a government, any government, but of course we're talking about Indonesia here, wants to curtail, stop foreign influence? If you go home to visit family, you're surely going to be bringing some foreign influence back with you to Indonesia. You can't keep the outside world away.
Yeah, that is the irony of it. I don't think President Joko Widodo really in control of what's going on in terms of this draft bill on music. Even though he's a fan of Metallica and he's been listening to heavy metal music, it doesn't mean that his policies are really reflecting to the anti-establishment insights in this in this sense. So if we see his promise of making Indonesian music becomes better in the future, especially under his presidency, under his government, surely President Jokowi has to be careful in regards of this draft bill, because if he sign the draft bill, it will be catastrophic and it will be disadvantaging the Indonesian music industry in general. It's actually harming Indonesian democracy as well.
Hikmawan Saifullah, thank you very much for your time and for joining us and speaking to us on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Adnan Nawaz. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, will Haiti's President Jovenel Moïse step down after thousands hit the streets to call for his resignation? Until then, thanks for watching. Goodbye.